Something has survived here that should never have made it through the filter of ruins, archives, official accounts. A tiny material detail that refuses to fit into history as it is told. In the halo of his lamp, George Bass suddenly sees a massive green shape resting on the rock. He reaches out his hand. Under his fingers, the late Bronze Age tips over. George Bass, an American archaeologist, descends for what he thinks will be a straightforward excavation of an ancient cargo. His job is to bring order to shipwrecks, to classify, date, explain. At 28 meters, his gloves grip one ingot, then a second, then a third. Metal everywhere. Too much. Too heavy, too dense, too organized. This is no longer a simple shipwreck. It is a trap set for terrestrial archaeology. He notes the discrepancy. On the way back up, Bass counts in his head. The ingots have that oxhide shape he knows from museums, from hoards found on land. Except here, they aren't just a few pieces lost in a sanctuary. They literally carpet an entire reef, 27 meters down, off a rocky cape in southern Turkey. A shipwreck from the early 12th century BCE, drowned in raw copper. And above all this, in the books, another story is already circulating, that of the mysterious Sea Peoples, those invaders supposedly responsible for bringing the kingdoms of the time to their knees. Nothing in this chaos of metal fits that narrative. A sense of uncertainty sets in. Bass dives again. His hands lay out the grid on the seabed, plant stakes, attach ropes. Square after square, the cargo reveals itself, like a file being opened. On the surface, the base camp records each measurement. The mystery is shrinking, he thinks. It will be enough to add up the clues. Hypothesis A, the simplest, the most reassuring. He is dealing with a ship from a great kingdom in crisis, a kind of official convoy, leaving a Mycenaean, Hittite, or Cypriot palace, loaded with copper to feed a desperate war. The picture is comforting. Sea Peoples landing, fortresses burning, and in the midst of this turmoil, a state vessel trying to keep the machine running. The oxhide ingots pile up like the bars of a royal treasure. The few fine ceramics point to elites. The shipwreck becomes collateral damage in a larger conflict. This hypothesis collapses in a single sentence, later written by Bass in his report. The tools found on the site are those of itinerant craftsmen, not of a palace convoy. For a moment, everything hangs in the balance. Everything changes. Hypothesis B takes shape, more complex, more disturbing for the grand heroic narrative. The ship would not be the flagship of an empire, but the floating platform of a late Bronze Age entrepreneur. The massive, standardized copper ingots come with crucibles, slag, cut scrap bronze. Chisels, gouges, saws attest to very concrete work, melting, cutting, recycling. The carefully calibrated weights tell a different story from a war mission. A man bargaining from market to market, weighing, deciding, adjusting his prices. The copper is no longer necessarily heading toward a royal arsenal. It can also end up in independent workshops, in secondary ports, far from the great capitals. In this version, the ship of Gelidonya belongs to a metallurgist merchant, a specialist sailing between Anatolia, Cyprus, and the Levant, supplying whoever pays, king or simple provincial notable. The Sea Peoples, in this framework, become almost secondary, background noise of crisis, with no proven direct link to this specific boat. The shipwreck would be an accident, a poorly negotiated reef, a current, human error. The great political collapses do not disappear, but they stop explaining everything. The fate of metal cargoes is no longer necessarily decided by waves of barbarians. It is also shaped by individual choices, private routes, discrete networks. Then comes Hypothesis C, brief and unsettling. What if even this vision of a free entrepreneur were not entirely true? The cuneiform tablets speak of tight contracts, of debts, of copper promised to such and such a court, of sanctions if deliveries are late. The metallurgist of Gelidonya might not be an independent actor, but an agent under pressure from a system he does not control. Trade, rather than a space of freedom, would be a web of obligations where craftsmen, kings, and so-called invaders are entangled. And the shipwreck, far from clarifying the crisis of the Bronze Age, would be its most opaque knot. A knot that tightens. Day after day, Bass runs into the same obstacle. On the seabed, the metal speaks. On the surface, the narratives hold out. On the coast, the camp is Spartan, tense, a table sagging under waterlogged notebooks, a clothesline where wetsuits hang to dry. A few hundred meters away, the sea lies flat, showing nothing. The whole storm is playing out 28 meters below. Underwater, movements are precise. Ace braces himself against the rocky slope to fight a lateral current. His fingers, numb from the cold, grab the grid, move the hose of an airlift that sucks up the sand and dumps it farther away. Bubbles shoot toward the surface in a white curtain. In front of him, the ingots form a compact mass, but the story they tell runs into an invisible wall, the one that separates what we see from what we want to go on believing. A wall with no visible crack. This wall has a single root. The big syntheses on the collapse of the Bronze Age like clean explanations. In these accounts, sea peoples arrive, cut off roots, burn cities, bring empires crashing down in a few decades. This image works too well. It fits in a few lines, it lines up causes and effects. It gives history an identifiable enemy, almost comfortable in its role as ultimate culprit. Everything Base hauls up from Gelidonya complicates this scheme instead of confirming it. The cargo is purely economic. No signs of weapons in large numbers, no batch of brand new swords ready for an army, no shields, no rows of spearheads. There are work tools, slag, weights. There are ceramics from several regions, mixed, as if the ship had moored at many quays without caring about political borders. On the bits of wood recovered under some of the ingots, no burns, no marks of combat, no proof of a violent boarding. Nothing that would attach this specific accident to an imagined naval battle on these coasts. Base feels the wall physically when he talks with other researchers. On the support boat, after the dives, debates begin. Some colleagues bring up Egyptian records mentioning invaders from the sea, the destroyed cities in the Levant, the abandoned Mycenaean palaces. All that exists. But in his dive logs, the grid numbers, the crosses marking the ingots, the drawings of tools speak a different language. Continuity of copper circuits, adaptation, tinkering, metal recyclers who seem to work as close as possible to the breaking point without dissolving into it immediately. The doubt remains. The only reason for the blockage lies in how the crisis is conceived. If one looks for armies, invasions, a sudden shock, Gelidonya becomes almost unreadable. If one accepts the idea of a system slowly coming apart from within, under the weight of economic dependencies, monopolies on metal, fragile trade routes, the wreck takes on meaning. But that meaning is less spectacular, less easy to tell. It doesn't offer a face for the catastrophe, just the vision of a thin network of ships like this one, trying to maintain a flow of copper and tin in a world that is cracking. This resistance is not abstract. It lodges itself in concrete details that hurt Base. One evening, he takes off his wetsuit. The skin of his neck is marked by the elastic band of his mask, red, irritated. The salt has dug a line that burns every time he moves his head. This tiny pain coincides with a realization. In bringing up the objects, in classifying them, he had hoped to find the missing piece that would neatly connect Gelidonya to the grand narrative of the Sea Peoples. A royal seal, an inscription, an emblematic weapon. Instead, he piles up signs of a gray economy, repair, recycling. He understands that his wall is not just scientific, it is narrative. The world he is excavating does not offer a single brilliant stroke that closes the investigation. It shows a slide, a slow stretching of crisis time. In this light, the Sea Peoples cease to be the sole authors of the disaster. They become one element among others in a landscape already cracked. Years later, most specialists converge. Gelidonya shows a merchant ship carrying metals, connected to trade networks still active at the moment when the great kingdoms were tottering. At conferences, a debate nonetheless persists. Some see in this wreck proof of surprising commercial resilience, despite the destruction. Others read in it instead a sign of ultimate tension, a commerce already on life support. And this divergence does not always fall where one might expect. Some defenders of older models cautiously admitting that the Sea Peoples do not explain everything. What many people flatly refuse is to give up the idea of a collapse, mainly caused by an identifiable external force, because that would require taking a closer look at the responsibility of internal structures, of elites dependent on metal, and thus admitting that the system may have destroyed itself. On paper, Bass had told himself a clear story. Ancient wrecks, he thought, would offer him snapshots of history with a capital H. A king's ship, a military convoy, a cargo that fits neatly into the known archives. Cape Gelidonya was supposed to be that, a tangible fragment of the legend of the Sea Peoples, a missing link that would connect texts, burned ruins, and the silent sea. Dive after dive, what he believed to be true comes undone. He does not find the marks he expected. No royal symbol stamped on every ingot, no clear trace of belonging to a specific empire, no consistent set of military objects. Instead, the cargo reveals itself as a mosaic of prosaic evidence. Raw copper in massive quantities, tin in much smaller proportion, scraps of bronze, worn crucibles, tools that bear the marks of intense use. The ceramics belong to several cultural horizons, with none that clearly dominates. The ship looks more like a mobile workshop and warehouse combined than an official vessel. What Bass discovers is not an illustrated chapter of the great invasion of the Sea Peoples. It is the bare materiality of an economic system under strain. Metallurgical analyses show worked copper, standardized, ready to be redistributed. The tin, rare, underscores everyone's dependence on a few fragile supply chains. The ratio of copper to tin, slightly off from the ideal proportions for making bronze, suggests trade-offs, shortages, constraints. Not a well-oiled war machine, but a constant compromise. The darkest surprise lies here. The Bronze Age crisis no longer appears as a storm blowing in from the open sea. It looks like the slow agony of a network that had made itself indispensable to itself. Kingdoms, cities, and workshops built their power on bronze, and thus on copper, on tin, on ships like the one from Gelidonya. When the slightest disruption occurs, changes in routes, political instability, a series of accidents, military pressure, the whole system is threatened. The Sea Peoples may well have existed, appeared in texts, attacked coasts, but what Gelidonya shows is that their possible violence only works by inserting itself into a pre-existing fragility, a mesh of exchanges in which a single missing ship, a single failed contract, can derail an entire chain of deliveries. For Bass, the illusion that collapses is twofold. First, the idea that great crises always have a clear external cause that one need only identify in order to solve the mystery. Second, the idea that underwater archaeology would offer clearer answers than terrestrial archaeology. Cape Gelidonya reveals something else to him. The sea also preserves gray areas. The wreck becomes a central case study for understanding the metal trade at the end of the Bronze Age, but also a brutal reminder that the Sea Peoples are not a universal key. The ship is not a pirate vessel, nor an identifiable refugee ship, nor a miniature invasion fleet. It is, at best, the boat of men who sail on a razor's edge, constrained craftsmen, merchants bound by agreements written elsewhere, cogs in a system whose entirety they cannot see. What he discovers instead of his expected narrative is a darker and more limited world. Great powers there depend on cargoes they do not fully control. Craftsmen work in an in-between, neither entirely free nor truly protected. Potential invaders are only one factor among others in an equation where scarcity, debt, and the vulnerability of trade routes count just as much. The Sea Peoples then cease to be an explanation. They become one question among others, posed to a landscape already cracked. At the end of the monograph, Bass cannot write, "Marine archaeology has solved the mystery of the Sea Peoples," in the way the general public would like. What it has done, through Gelidonya, is more destabilizing. It has stripped this enigma of its status as a single, reassuring enemy, to reveal the extent of a system that is staggering from within. Only one question remains, hammering away. If a simple wreck of a copper merchant ship is enough to crack the myth of the great invaders, what is it that we still stubbornly refuse to see today in our own crisis narratives? In the end, the ingots still lie there, some stuck to the rock, covered with a skin of whitish concretions. Between two verdigris masses, a small fish passes through, then disappears into a dark cavity. The diver's light cuts sharp rectangles in the sand, then moves away, letting the shapes become indistinct again. Higher up, the surface barely ripples. A pale line in the distance marks the coast, silent. On a museum shelf behind glass, a single polished ingot gleams under a fixed spotlight, isolated from those that once surrounded it.